Joining us now is Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, it's always a pleasure to see you, sir. Just your reaction to what is now going into second month of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Well, the butcher of Moscow won't stop the indiscriminate bombing of civilians, won't stop the trying to starve out cities in contravention of Security Council Resolution 2417, which Russia voted for, that says when you prohibit humanitarian corridors from taking place and humanitarian access from taking place, it is a war crime. Well, Russia is committing under Putin war crimes as defined by the very UN Senate resolution that they voted for. And so, the Ukrainians have shown an incredible spirit, courage. The fight that they've taken to the Russians is extraordinary, but people are still dying. And that's why I applaud the president for being with the NATO leaders to figure out what else can be done, both in terms of lethal assistance to Ukraine, both in terms of sanctions and other elements against Putin, so that that economic noose around his neck continues to tighten until they're asphyxiated.
Yeah, I mean, President Zelensky told NATO members today that Russia has used phosphorus bombs. NBC News has not been able to independently confirm these claims. But when it comes to the use of chemical, biological, or maybe, as Helene Cooper was saying, possibly tactical nuclear weapons, are there any red lines you think that the world, NATO, the United States, should have on these issues?
Well, Jose, that's what they're at NATO discussing. I mean, this is a whole new world, right? What is an attack? Because if, in fact, for example, Putin makes the extreme decision to have a tactical nuclear weapon explode in Ukraine, it doesn't mean that only Ukraine will suffer as a result of it. Whether or not the winds would take that into neighboring countries would be a question. Is that an attack against a NATO ally? What is the response to that? Of course, there are chemical weapons conventions that could be invoked against Russia for violating those international agreements of which they are part of. There's always a consideration. Is there a limited military response to such an action? These are all the decisions that NATO leaders have to make, because it has to be a NATO response at the end of the day if it is to take place.
Senator, a source familiar with the Biden administration's thinking says the U.S. is expected to announce plans to welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainians and others fleeing the war in Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, this is exactly what I called upon the administration to do in a letter that I sent to the president and to the Secretary of State. We have nearly 4 million Ukrainians that have fled the country, millions more that are displaced inside of Ukraine. And our allies in Europe and Poland and other places, other countries, I should say, have borne the brunt of it. We need to be part of that solution. We are a beacon of light to the rest of the world. Doing 100,000 Ukrainian refugee resettlements, I think, is an important part of showing that we will do our share as we ask other countries to meet the burden. And we have significant Ukrainian communities, I know in my home state of New Jersey and elsewhere, where there could be significant family reunification, and where those most at risk, like journalists and human rights advocates within Ukraine that have had to seek refuge, could be given refuge in the United States. If that's the final decision of the administration, I certainly applaud it. It's what I called for.
Senator, as a keen student of history, how do you see this war in Ukraine ending?
That is the ultimate question that everybody is asking themselves and trying to decide. Of course, trying to fully understand Vladimir Putin and whether or not he is still a rational actor is the open question. I could see Putin trying to ultimately say, okay, you have to recognize Crimea as Russia, take the Donbass, you take that section along Mariupol that they have concluded that they're in the midst of still fighting for, which creates a land bridge into Crimea, and basically you split off the eastern part of Ukraine, and saying that and neutrality. I don't know that President Zelensky will decide that, but I could see that being a offer that Russia makes as a way for them to stop their indiscriminate bombing. These are hard choices that President Zelensky would have to make, and certainly it's for him and the Ukrainian people to decide, after suffering so much, what is it that they will or will not accept. But short of that, what we see is a continuing bombing of cities, because his troops on the ground, the much vaunted Russian army, has not been able to achieve what they were supposed to achieve. So he is now using his firepower indiscriminately to ultimately, destroy Ukrainian cities. And as I said before, using the encirclement of these cities and denying humanitarian corridors, which is in violation of UN Security Council resolutions that Russia voted for, and that is a war crime. And that's why I'm glad to see the administration, to Secretary Blinken, say that they have come to the determination that actions of the Russian military, in fact, amount to war crimes. Every day there is more evidence of that.
Senator Bob Menendez, thank you for being with us. I so appreciate your time.
Thank you.